And we started recording. There we
go. Okay, and Scudder, can you see when are people in?
Yes, we have some folks coming in now.
Okay, just tell me when you want me to start.
We can start letting folks go now. We can welcome folks.
Okay, super. Hello, if you're joining us tonight for the GoBORO virtual public meeting, we're so glad you're giving us some time this evening for this really important project. And we hope you're going to leave with a lot more information than when you're coming in right now. And we hope you're going to be as excited about this as we are. And we look forward to diving in and getting into some of the details.
And we're going to give folks a few more minutes to start getting into the meeting. So
okay,
we'll just hold tight for another minute or two.
Okay.
And then we'll get started. Okay, I think we've got most of the attendees in, so we can probably get underway. And to start us off, I think Reggie Mason with the city GTA would like to say a few words of welcome.
Okay, good evening, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Welcome to our GoBORO virtual public meeting. Sorry you can't see me. I have a lot of glare here in my office, but we're here to talk about the 2040 transit plan. It's a long-range transit plan that we're hoping to roll out and ensure that we go along with the council's directive of being car optional by 2045. This plan will need public support to move forward. Well, we're gonna the consulting team is going to present two concepts to you, one dealing with ridership and the other dealing with coverage. If you look, when they present this to you, I want you to think about the services that we provide now and look at the services that we can provide in the future. Anything that is presented to you tonight will show that what will be offered in the future is a lot better than what we're doing today. So they're going to talk about a few things, going to give you two options to look at. And as part of this plan, to move forward, it would take a sales tax for us to do it, which the team will talk about. It's a half-cent sales tax, and it would help us improve transit services here in Greensboro. So now I'm going to turn it over to the consulting team and hope you all enjoy the virtual meeting.
Thanks so much, Reggie. So good evening, folks. My name is Scudder Wag. I'm a transit planner, project manager with Jarrett Walker and Associates, leading the consultant team, helping the city with the GoBORO transit plan. And I'll be your primary facilitator for the meeting this evening. Assisting and participating, of course, Reggie from the city, who you just heard from. Also, some additional staff from the city and GTA, Gray Johnston, Bruce Adams, George Linney, and a few others. Also from the consultant team assisting us is Amy Hubbard, who you see and you heard from at the very beginning. She's part of our team reaching out on the ground, and she'll talk a little more about all of the public outreach happening in the next few weeks towards the end of our discussion tonight. And also with us this evening is one of my associates, Mihir Bosel. He is an associate with us who's also helping with some of the technical aspects of our virtual meeting tonight. Just some quick notes on the ground rules. We welcome your questions. We're going to have a presentation at any time during the presentation. You can put a question into the Q&A box. or raise your hand if you have a verbal question. And when we get to a point of discussion, we can let you talk and ask a question. There's a chat box you can use at any point to share ideas or other questions, perhaps technical issues. And you can use that chat box to send a message directly to Mahir if you're having some sort of technical issue. And we can try to assist you with that to make sure you can all participate fully in the evening's agenda. So with that, our agenda tonight, what is GoBORO? And then talk a little bit about what's transit look like today in Greensboro. And then talk about these concepts that Reggie mentioned. What could a better transit system for Greensboro look like? And then some questions, discussion, and then we have some polling questions for you to get your feedback on what you feel is best for Greensboro based on what you hear. And then a little bit more about the next steps of this planning process. So let's jump right in. So why are we looking at this? Well, there's a big idea from the city's comprehensive plan, becoming car optional. GSO 2040 said we want to be a city that gives you lots of options so that you can travel by walking, biking, transit, all of these other modes, which are much more space efficient and often much more cost efficient for most people. So to do that, we need to look long-term and what could transit be, and how could the city further this goal through its investments in transit? You're spending, you already have a significant investment in transit. Could you do more with more? Could you do it better if you had more? So what about your existing system? This is a map of your existing bus network on the right. And very importantly, it's color-coded by the frequency of service, which I'll mention a number of times tonight, because the frequency tells us a lot about how useful service is. And you will see most of these lines, like the 12 on Elm Eugene, or the 8 on, or the 9 on Market, or the 1 on Wendover, are colored in blue. That means a route that comes every 30 minutes most of the day. There's a few that are highlighted in green, like on Lawndale, the 17, or the 12A. Those are routes that come every 60 minutes. It's a pretty long wait. And you see a few routes that are different colors, like the 73, which is the UNC Greensboro circulator route that comes every 20 minutes, which is a bit more frequent. And then the 75, which actually does not run anymore. This is in the spring, which came every 15 minutes. And so the existing network, when you look at it big picture, it covers a lot of the city, but not all of the city, but it also has relatively limited frequency of only every 30 minutes. But this is just this is looking at the midday on a weekday. What about if we look at all across the day and across the week? So again, this is a chart that looks at what's the frequency of service across every route across different times of day and on weekdays and on the weekends. And so that blue color for most of the routes is there every 30-minute service from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. But after 6 p.m., bus routes only run every hour on most routes in the system. And on weekends, the routes only run every hour across the whole system. So the frequency of service is relatively poor, we would say, particularly on the weekends and the evenings. 30-minute service is not bad. It but it does require a relatively long wait to get to a lot of places then when you're trying to use the system today. The other thing that's important to note about this is if you work in a retail job, or you work in a hospital, or you work other places where you often have to work on weekends, that hourly service on weekends really is hard to live with. It means waits are really long. So that's a big challenge for a lot of folks. And this leads to one of the big challenges you have using transit in Greensboro, which is it takes a long time to get places quite often. And we can map that. We can map that challenge with what we call the wall around your life. So this is Jane. Imagine she happens to live near off of West Wendover out here, not far from Guilford College Road. And if she wants to go somewhere by transit, this bubble is how far she can get in dark purple in 30 minutes, in this medium purple color in 45 minutes, and the light purple color in 60 minutes. So it takes her, when you count the walking time to a stop, the waiting time, possibly the transfer time to another route, all of those factors, takes her almost an hour to get all the way downtown when you count all those factors. Can we make this better? Could we grow the area you could reach in a reasonable amount of travel time? If we wanted to do that, we know the recipe for a transit improvements and networks that do that. It's high frequency lines with a connected network. It's reasonably fast and reliable. And that's, if we're doing the most for the most people, focused on places that transit can serve a lot of people well, meaning dense, walkable, linear, and proximate places. And frequency comes first. High frequency means public transit is coming soon and has three really critical independent benefits. It means you wait less when you're waiting for the bus to come initially. It means easier connections, where you have buses coming every 10 or 15 minutes in two different lines that intersect. It means you can transfer from one to the other without a long wait, and it's really easy. And it has less of an impact from disruptions. So if the bus is pulling up to your stop and for some reason it breaks down, you can know another bus is coming soon. When you're on an hourly route, it's a real challenge because it could mean you have to wait for a new bus to get dispatched from the garage, and that could take a long time. So when you have bus routes and transit that's running at really high frequency, you tend to not just get more ridership, but you tend to get more ridership relative to cost. But frequency is not something that's intuitive for folks who don't use transit most of the time. It can be hard to explain for folks who spend most of their life driving or biking, because you don't experience the problem of you cannot go until the vehicle arrives. So the experience in your daily life might be if you have to wait a long time for an elevator to show up, or you have to wait a long time for a freight train to pass. But another way to think about having to wait a long time until you can go is, imagine that there were a gate at the end of your driveway and it only opens once an hour. That's the experience of living on an hourly bus route. And you have to be in your car ready to go when the gate opens, or you have another hour until you can go. So frequency is really, really critical to that usefulness of transit and that potential for transit to be really successful, for people to use transit. This raises a challenge, though, because providing really frequent service is somewhat expensive. So that means if we want to put frequent service in a lot of places, we can't really put it everywhere, and we can't be equally useful everywhere. So we tend to want to focus it on the places where it's going to serve a lot of people and serve them well. So that means we tend to look for dense places. So how many people are near transit? If we're spending 2 buses to provide frequent service in this upper diagram where there are a lot of houses near the bus route, we're going to get a lot more potential riders, and we're going to make a lot more people's lives better with the 2 buses we're spending than we would if we're spending it down here, where there's lower density. And so there are fewer people near each stop. It's just the pure geometry of the situation. So when we're looking at where could frequent transit be really useful to lots and lots of people, we're looking at where do lots of people live. So we're looking at maps of the density of the population. This is a map of that density of population across Greensboro. You see really high density closer to downtown, around UNCG, but also to the north of some stretches of Church and Yanceyville to the north, and so on. We're also looking at job density, where there are lots of jobs, because jobs are where people want to go. Oftentimes, not just to work, but to shop, to go to medical services, and so on. You see a lot of job density downtown. You see a pretty high job density along and around UNC Greensboro. You see fairly high job density along Wendover, around Church and Elm. You see moderate density out on West Wendover as well. A lot of those big shopping centers, for example. So we're looking at that. We're also looking at walkability. When you have a well-connected street network, it's easy to walk from a bus stop to lots and lots of destinations that are within a quarter mile flying distance from a stop. And that's what this diagram up here is showing you. When you have a stop located in a place where there's lots of cul-de-sacs and there's lots of disconnected streets, it means you just can't reach as many destinations that might be visible from the stop, but you can't actually walk there very easily because the street network makes you go way out of your way. And you also have to be able to safely cross the street. If you can't safely cross the street, it's really hard to get to the stop that's taking you back home if you've gone to the grocery store. So we're looking at these patterns and, for example, the connectivity of streets across Greensboro. And this is a little heat map that shows that connectivity of streets and how good it is across Greensboro. And then we're looking at things like what we call linearity. How straight can a transit line be to connect lots of useful destination and lots of opportunity? If a bus route or transit line has to turn off and go back into a long cul-de-sac, it's going to take longer. It's going to take more time, which means it costs the transit agency more to run, but it also means people go way out of their way if they want to go from their house to the office park or from their house to the shopping center and always have to go back and forth through lots of deviations. As opposed to if you can run a bus route on a straight line and people can get on and off and walk pretty reasonably close to lots of destinations, that's going to get you more access and more connectivity and more riders per dollar spent. And then proximity. Do we have destinations that are reasonably close together, or do we have places that are really far apart with long kind of empty gaps in between? And if we have long gaps in between, that costs more because you have to spend more money on operators and drivers running the service, because time is money when we're paying people. So these are the things that you're really thinking about if we want to try to get that frequency to lots and lots of people in an efficient and effective way. There's also a question about what do we do about folks in need? If there are a lot of people, say, of low income or who have don't have a car, and they're in a place that's reasonably dense and reasonably linear and reasonably proximate and pretty walkable, that's a place that makes a lot of sense to serve no matter what, because it kind of fits this recipe of really useful service that can serve a lot of people effectively. If there's people in need in isolated pockets, like in apartment complexes way off on the edge of town in a cul-de-sac, that creates a challenge of it costs a lot of money to reach those folks. And how much do we spend to serve every person in need in a hard to reach place? And that's related to a question I'll talk about in a little bit about this question of how much do we spend on coverage and how much do we spend on high ridership and high access service. But we're looking at those questions too, of where are people in need and the severity of need and the density of need. So the density of people in poverty across the city. And you see this pattern of relatively higher levels of people in poverty in these sort of eastern to southern parts of the city. We're similarly looking at where are there large numbers of people without cars. We're looking at where are senior residents, for example, where are youth, because people under 18, many of them don't, most of them don't, vast majority of them don't have driver's licenses, and they might want access by transit. So these are some of the things we're looking at. And I know we've gotten a couple of questions in Q&A, and so I'm going to look over at me here and see, are there questions that have come up that we should answer verbally or hands raised that we should answer before we go on to talk about the concepts of what you could do better?
Casey has just asked that, are we considering people who don't have cars and where people who don't have a lot of money live? So that you just went over that.
Yep, we just touched on that question.
And Kenisha is asking, are there any future plans to have a route for the new Garden Road area?
Which we'll talk about in just a moment.
Yep. And Catherine Netter has a pretty big comment. So we can probably get to it after that. I don't see a very specific question. And
Okay, very good. So some of you are asking about where could we serve if we had more service and better service? So we've developed some concepts of what could better transit in Greensboro look like. And a big starting statement here is becoming truly car optional really means you need more transit. And this chart is measuring how much service you have per person. So a bus running on the street for 1 hour is 1 service hour. And if you take all the service hours that you're running today in Greensboro and divide it by the number of people, you have about 0.53 service hours per person per year. Compared to a lot of peers in places like Durham, just down the road from you all, they have about 40% more service than you do per person. You look farther afield to a place like Knoxville, they've got almost twice as much service. Oh, excuse me. When we compare that to how many people ride transit per person, you see a pretty common pattern of places that have more service are also places that get more riders. Because in part, you can't ride a bus that's not there. If the bus just doesn't exist in the evening, when you have much lower frequency, fewer people are going to ride. But related to this question of if we want to really maximize access and opportunity, it raises a question of what does it mean for Greensboro to become car optional by 2024? Does it mean that most people have an option that's really useful for reaching a lot of places, and so a lot more people would choose to ride? Or does it mean that everyone has a transit option? Everyone in the city has some transit option, even if it's not necessarily that useful for getting to a lot of places in a reasonable amount of time. And this relates to that question of how much do we spend to try to reach everyone versus how much do we spend to get really useful service to lots of people. So we have 2 concepts for what could really better service in Greensboro look like. On the left is what we call the ridership concept. And in this concept, you see the same color by frequency of where routes could go. And on this map, you see a lot more red, that red meaning a bus that's coming every 15 minutes. So you have multiple corridors crisscrossing the city, like East Market through downtown to Spring Garden and West Wendover, the number 1 on this map. That's every 15 minutes. Or Willow and MLK Drive into downtown and across through Friendly every 15 minutes, with continuing service every 30 minutes on New Garden Road to Bryant Parkway to the airport, or continuing out Friendly every 30 minutes to Coble Transit Center. You've got the Market corridor, West Market, on this number 9 every 15 minutes. And you have South Elm Eugene, Randleman, North Church, many other routes across the city every 15 minutes. So it's really useful service on lots of corridors across the city. You've got some improvements on a few other corridors like Lawndale's every 30 minutes. But you don't see a lot of new service on a lot of new streets. A few places like this stretch of New Garden have service that don't have service today, but mostly this is a lot more frequency across a lot of places that have service today. So this is really investing in that maximizing access to opportunity for most people, because most people who are served would get really good service. Now, if you wanted to do something a little different, which is, let's say you wanted to spend your dollars to make sure a lot more people had service, but it wasn't necessarily going to be that frequent. This is what we call the coverage concept. It's spending the same big increase in service. Both of these have 120%, so more than double today's service. You have frequent service on 4 corridors, one of them going through downtown. Most other routes you see are still every 30 minutes, like on Church, on South Elm Eugene and Randleman. But you also have a big extension of routes, like this 15 route is now going all the way up to Reedy Fork. You also see some extensions of service. More of New Garden Road is served all the way from Battleground down to Friendly and beyond to the south. You also see these TAN on-demand service zones where you could call up and get a trip in about 30 minutes to connect to fixed routes. So the southeast part of the city, this far eastern part of the city, like where the Publix is, this far north part of the city on Elm, north of the 840. So this is trying to cover most everyone, but if we do that with the same amount of resources, we can't do it as frequently as we can in the ridership concept. So again, just comparing to today, you basically have primarily 30-minute service. The ridership concept would cover most of the major corridors of your city with every 15-minute service. And it would extend a little bit farther in some places, like taking this 4B route all the way to the airport terminal, taking this 4A route on Friendly all the way to the Coble Transit Center, and making much better connections to PART. I should note, of course, that PART also has some improved service in these concepts. The assumption is that the potential sales tax source of funding would provide funding to Greensboro, to High Point, to PART, and to the county, and PART services out of the airport would be vastly improved as well. And then the coverage concept, again, a lot more 30-minute service extended to a lot of places that don't have it today, like that New Garden Road section. A lot more on-demand zones that you don't have at all in that ridership concept. So that a lot more people have some service, but not necessarily as useful. So just a reminder of the things one of the ways we're measuring success is this access to opportunity. I showed you that bubble before from Jane. This is just an abstract example. If she lives in this city full of all kinds of possible places she could go, this is how far she could get in 45 minutes. This is the jobs and opportunities and shopping that's in that area. And we can kind of think of that as her freedom and her access to opportunity. And we can count up a lot of the things that are in there. So we can do that exact sort of analysis across lots and lots of places all across Greensboro to tell you how might these concepts change people's freedom and liberty. So from Hampton Homes, today, you can reach about 38,900 jobs in 45 minutes. So this gray bubble is how far you can get on the existing bus network in 45 minutes of travel time. This bubble in blue is how far you could get if we had that coverage concept network. So she could get to 45,300 jobs in 45 minutes, which is about 17% more jobs. Again, jobs are counting not just jobs you could hold and work at, but jobs represent shopping destinations, medical services, all sorts of things you might want to do for all sorts of reasons. So it's almost in a way like you could say, if you lived here, you're 17% more free. The ridership concept from this particular location at Hampton Homes would mean you could reach 73,400 jobs. Because the frequency of service is so much better, you're waiting less, you can go farther in the same amount of time. That's 89% more jobs from this particular location. And we can look at this from other places. So if we look from Willow Oaks more on the east side of town, today you can reach 29,200 jobs. The coverage concept would increase that to 39,000 jobs, about a 34% increase. The ridership concept would increase it to 55,400 jobs that you could reach from Willow Oaks. That's about a 90% increase from today. So just kind of replaying this animation to see that difference. We have lots of examples of these on the project website showing you different locations around Greensboro. I encourage you to go there and see some of these examples, some of the examples that might be closer to your home, to see what kind of change in transit access you might get from these concepts. So we can do that kind of thing, bubbles all over the city, and test different neighborhoods, and then average out the change for everyone across the city. And if we do that, we get a bar chart like this one on the left side, which is telling us that for the typical person in Greensboro today, if we average out across the entire population, all across the city, typical person can reach almost 7,000 jobs. Doesn't sound like a lot. That's in part because there's a whole lot of people who can't reach any because they don't really have access to transit service right now. The coverage concept would increase that average access to almost 13,000 jobs, to about 86% increase. The ridership concept would increase it to over 15,000 jobs, 140% increase over today. And we can do the same kind of analysis just for residents in poverty. Residents in poverty would see a 51% increase in job access from the coverage concept and 122% increase in job access in 45 minutes in the ridership concept. Our full report that's also on the website dives into analyzing this for people of color, for seniors, for other populations. So if you want more detail on all of that, encourage you to go to the website. You can read our full detailed report and get all the nitty-gritty there. The other measure people may be really interested in is, well, I'm concerned about how many people are covered, are near any kind of service. And we can analyze that with a proximity measure or a coverage measure. And so these bar charts are breaking down that kind of measure of success. So in this top group, we have how many residents are within a half a mile of transit. And the existing network, this set of bar charts is telling us that about 55% of existing residents are near some kind of transit service, 52%. And 48% in the gray bar are more than a half a mile from any transit service. And then this is color-coded by the frequency of service. So most of those people near service today are near 30-minute service, which is the blue bar. The ridership concept significantly changes how many people are near frequent service. So now 34% of people are near a frequent service. It doesn't move the total of these colors up much. The gray bar goes down to 45%, meaning 55% of people are near something. So the ridership concept, again, a lot of people near frequent service, but not a big increase in the total number of people near service. The coverage concept kind of does the opposite. You see a big drop off in how many people are in this gray bar, meaning people who aren't served. Now you've got 76% of people near some kind of transit service, but only 15% are near frequent service. So this is giving us that sort of perspective of what does the coverage concept do well? It gets service to a lot of people. And we see the same sort of pattern with jobs that are served. The ridership concept means 48% of jobs would be near frequent service, and about 66% would be near any service. The coverage concept, only 24% of jobs are near 15-minute service, but 75% of jobs are near some kind of service. And again, residents in poverty, you see a similar pattern of difference between what the ridership concept does and what the coverage concept does in improving service. Now, how could you pay for this? I said both of these concepts assume 120% more service, so more than twice as what you have today. That would mean in today's dollars, you'd need about 27 million additional dollars per year to operate the service. And I say operate because operations, paying people to run the service, the mechanics to maintain the service, the dispatchers, that's the primary cost of transit service day in, day out, is that operating it every year in and out. That is an amount that could be funded by a 1/2-cent sales tax that the North Carolina law gives the county an option to put on a referendum. And the revenue from that countywide sales tax would need to be shared with High Point Part in the county. And we estimate that Greensboro and GTA would get about 65% of the funding, which would be about $27 million a year in today's dollars. That could fund that big expansion in these two concepts. That 1/2-cent sales tax, if you look at the typical household spending patterns and the goods that are taxable under that, for example, food from the grocery store is not taxable. The average household, it would cost them about $9 per month in the typical basket of goods that a household buys in a given month. So that's what it would cost versus what would you get in all of those improvements in service and access and freedom that I just showed you. So like I said, we have a lot more detail in the full choices and concepts report. There's also a shorter executive summary for those who want the quick version. You can scan this QR code if you want to go to the website and check out the material there to answer questions. But now is a good time to pause, get your questions, have some discussion, see what you think before we ask you all to give us any initial thoughts on what you think. So I see we've had some Q&A, and are there questions we should bring up? Are there people who would like to ask a question verbally? You can raise your hand and we'll unmute you if you want to ask a question verbally. I see Casey Thomas asks, if you pick one plan, which plan is easiest to build off of? Because getting a lot of places and having frequent access is important. Say people want to invest more later, which model can you do now and build off of later more easily? So that's an interesting question, Casey, because it raises an important distinction here, which is we're not actually asking you one or the other. We're asking you, which direction do you lean in between these two concepts? Coverage and ridership concepts represent kind of ends of a spectrum of possibility. And, we're asking the public, when we develop a draft plan or a set of recommendations for the city, where should we be closer to? We know the final plan is probably going to be somewhere in between these two maps. But in general, we want to see in which direction does the community lean. In terms of what would be better to build off of, there's arguments actually in both directions about what's easier to build off of. If you implemented something closer to the ridership concept, the value you get out of that is the extremely useful service shows the value of transit to large numbers of people in a really positive way, which might build support for even more investment over time. Secondarily, the coverage concept would, of course, bring some transit service to a lot more people, potentially showing the value of that kind of basic access of service to most of the city, which could potentially build support long-term for additional expansion and investment. So there's kind of arguments in both directions about how you could do more now and build off of it later. So I think we answered that. I think we have a hand raised. Somebody who might want to ask a question verbally. From here, can you see, is it Catherine? Yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think it's hard to answer which one to build off of, right? Because they both overlap, right? Because the amount of coverage that you provide will increase the ridership, right? And vice versa. So my biggest concern, and I hope will continue to be something that will stay in the draft copy, is just considering, North Carolina is still one of those states that has not raised the minimum wage from $7.25 since 2009 when it was done on the federal level. And so the argument is always to people that, well, there are better jobs out there that pay well above a minimum wage. The counter to that is there's no way that I can get to it, right? And so if it doesn't go from my community, and it's usually low income communities, and you did put some examples up, but if it doesn't go from my community out to those jobs, usually the FedExes and the Amazons, the $15 an hour jobs are out by the airport. And if it does get me out there, if I'm second or third shift, will it bring me back, right? And so I just hope that those things continue to be a consideration. But in response to your question, which do we build off of? For me, and maybe it may not be the same for everyone on the call, but for me, it's hard to really answer that because you covered it well. It's just that one sort of depends on the other, right? Because what you're covering determines who's going to ride. And then there's also another consideration is in the draft, are we putting things in there that will make it attractive in terms of safety concepts? Will there be emergency buttons? Will there be security cameras? Will there be, so all of that is a factor. Will there be ottomans or coverage should it rain, or does it account for bad weather? So is it attractive, and does it cover the areas that is needed, and are the hours going to take care of first, second, and third shift job concerns. I know that was a lot that I said in there, but thank you.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, you raised some good issues to think more about, some of which I think we have more answers on. Of course, we can only cover so much in our discussion tonight, but in the Choices and Concepts report, one of the things we do talk about is the improved span and frequency of service that I didn't talk a lot about in the presentation, but both of these concepts assume improved span and frequencies on the weekends and in the evenings, so that if you work a second or third shift job, you are much more likely to be able to get there on these networks, because they are there 7 days a week. They are there late into the evening till midnight, or I believe, is that right, Mihir? Roughly
1 a.m.
Yeah, till 1 a.m. actually. Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
So that makes a big improvement in both of these. Of course, the coverage concept covers more places. So, if you're working a second or third shift job in a place that it touches, and the ridership concept doesn't touch, that would make a bigger difference to you, obviously. So, span of service is you're right. It's a big factor for a lot of those job opportunities people might want to work and reach. And in terms of, safety and comfort, there is an assumption in here about a certain portion of that sales tax funding would go to helping to pay for shelters and other stop amenities and improvements in the walking infrastructure around stops. And that's all important, obviously, from a safety perspective. We haven't really gotten into the nitty gritty about, would you have cameras or things like that, but I can certainly understand the interest in having those things in certain places if you have concerns for safety. The one thing I will say, at the level of altitude and planning that we're working in at this point in the process, which is kind of big picture, longer term, the one big difference when you're thinking about how much could you invest in and get out of improvements in shelters and safety and infrastructure is a coverage oriented network is going to have a lot more routes and a lot more stops in a lot more places. And with a fixed certain amount of funding, let's say it's, $3 million a year you can spend on those things. It has to get spread more thinly on a coverage oriented system. So you would have fewer amenities or fewer dollars for every stop you're trying to make better with a coverage concept than with a more ridership and frequency oriented concept. So really good questions on that front. Do we have some other questions we can answer that are not fully answered already?
We have a question from Nicole Gaines.
So Nicole says the illustration minimizes the reality of jobs with thriving wages. The demonstration office focuses on low income ridership. If the transportation focuses its ridership program on getting riders from more affluent areas and who would like to visit downtown. Additionally, the thriving wage jobs are not with Jane's access area. They are the airport area or very north and east of the city. So Nicole, you certainly, I think, raised some points that I think were mentioned earlier about, there's a lot of jobs that are around the airport that the challenge we face out there is that for fixed route transit to reach those, it can be very expensive because a lot of the industrial development out there is in kind of circuitous and cul-de-sac like development. So both of these concepts, though, assume that the part services that are out there today are much improved, which would help access to those jobs in those areas of the city. There's also a conversation to be had about employers doing more to run shuttle services to connect to transit, like running shuttles to Coble Transit Center or running shuttles to the airport terminal to connect to fixed route transit, to help build better connections in ways that are cost effective for everyone. Because it would cost a lot of money to run a bunch of transit shuttles all through these industrial areas when shift times may not align very well with the schedules. And that's one of the big challenges with those kinds of employment areas that are spread out around the airport in a kind of hard to reach area. The other side of the equation is there are quite a few, middle to lower wage, mid-skill, lower skill type jobs that people can reach all across the city when you're looking at universities and hospitals and retail locations that are much, much easier to reach when you have higher frequency service and can be reached much more quickly. There's also, on this more frequent network in the ridership concept, a lot of educational destinations like community colleges that are much easier to reach for people who are trying to, better their lives. So lots of reasons to want to go in either direction here. So I think we roughly answered some of these questions, and I think Catherine's question was sort of related to the verbal question you raised. So I think we generally answered that. So I don't think we have any other questions in the Q&A box. Is there anyone else who wants to raise their hand and ask a question? Let's see, we have one more.
I have a question. So if, depending on what the city does for their space plan, like if they were to change areas to allow higher density housing, would that have a significant effect on how well one or the other of these would function?
Over the long term, it might. And part of the next phase of this work, this plan will include what we're calling a TOD analysis, transit-oriented development analysis, which it will look at what are some example policies that you might follow to encourage higher density development, lower parking requirements, and so on, particularly along whatever frequent lines might get planned in the final recommendations of this process. Because when I described that ridership recipe of density, walkability, linearity, and proximity, of course, we're kind of looking at what is your status today, but your state can change over the next 20 or 30 years. And you can improve people's access by putting better transit out there. You can also improve people's access by putting more stuff near good transit. And the focus overall of this planning process is, let's build a better transit network that serves the city of today and the city of tomorrow by expanding and improving service. But it is also to say, here are some tools that you can use on the land use side to, over the long term, make your city more transit conducive. So that will be kind of a corollary set of recommendations that will come in the draft plan phase, in the second phase of our work.
Okay, thank you.
So let's jump on to the opportunity for you all to answer some questions. We have some polling questions to ask you about how you respond to these concepts. This question is similar to the question on the public survey, where we ask if you prefer the ridership do you strongly prefer the ridership concept, prefer the ridership concept, prefer the coverage concept, or strongly prefer the coverage concept, or are you not sure at this point? I'd just like to get a sense of, after having heard the initial thinking tonight, where you all might land on this question. This is an unofficial poll, just for the purposes of some interactivity tonight. We encourage you to go to the website and take the official online survey, or, as Amy will talk about in a few minutes, visit us at some of our upcoming in-person events where you can take the survey on paper if you prefer to do that. So I think we've gotten most of our participants here to answer this question. So why don't we end this poll and show folks the results? Share the results there. So we see So from the group tonight, 11 of you answered this question, and it seems like there's a little bit of a preference in this group for the ridership concept. Few of you are unsure, but again, that's just from 11 folks who joined us this evening. But definitely some uncertainty among some of you, because you might want to learn more. So next question is, would you support increasing the local funding so for improved GTA bus service? And if we open that poll up, the options are, would you support a big increase, helping you get close to the concepts that we showed you tonight? Would you support a small increase, maybe something smaller to get, maybe halfway to those concepts? Would you say you don't support any increase? Or would you say there's too much being spent on transit today? So give you all a moment to think about that question. And while y'all are answering this question, I see we have a Q&A in the box from Hayden about how did the idea of using a sales tax come to be? Has there been any discussion of alternative sources of funding, such as reallocation of existing budget or property taxes? Excellent question, Hayden. The city has, looked at internally, I think, the possibility of other options. The city could always look to its general fund to try to find the 27 million we're talking about to fund one of these concepts, or some mix between the two. The reason for looking at the sales tax is that it is a dedicated, consistent source of funding that would go to transit, and that it would be something that could support transit investment in Greensboro and across the whole county. So the city service would be improved, part service would be improved, county services would be improved, and High Point services could be improved, so that you would have better connectivity, not just within Greensboro, but across the whole region. And since the North Carolina legislature has given the county the authority or the option, it is been a commonly used option in lots of places like Charlotte, Durham, Orange County, Chapel Hill, and Wake County, Raleigh, to significantly improve transit. So why don't we close this poll? We've got most of you answered, and it looks like most of you support a big increase to possibly get somewhere close to these concepts that we've shown you tonight. So if we go to our last polling question for the night, it's about that half-cent sales tax. So like I said, this has been this would be the simplest, perhaps, option for finding the funding, in terms of the simplicity of not having to make hard trade-offs of cutting any existing things from your general fund, or look for other areas of funding from the city's resources, like property tax. So would you definitely support, probably oppose, or definitely oppose that potential investment? And again, the sales tax option would have to go to the voters in a referendum. I see we've got most people have responded to this question. So why don't we give people there we go, and share the results here. We see most of you definitely in this meeting, again, of the 12 of you who responded, would say you would definitely support a sales tax to fund these improvements. Okay. So we've got one other question that's popped up. I see Casey Thomas is asking, is this a thing that you could use an enterprise fund for? That is perhaps a little bit outside my expertise, but my understanding of enterprise funds is normally enterprise funds for most cities are limited to services that are paid for where the payment typically covers the full cost of the service. So gas utilities are an example of an enterprise fund that are often run by a municipality. In the case of transit, fares and other things like advertising generally only cover about 10% of the operating cost of running transit service, which is why you need the subsidy from city or state or other sources to make a big difference in how much transit service you can provide. So I don't think this is something that could be funded through a typical enterprise fund mechanism unless there's some really unusual enterprise mechanism that I'm not aware of. I'd be happy to let anyone at the city chime in on that if they have other thoughts. All right. Well, hearing none, Amy, who is part of the consultant team and is helping to do a lot of the on-the-ground outreach, is going to tell us all a little more about what's coming up in the next couple of weeks in on-the-ground engagement that we're talking to the public about. And before she jumps in and tells you a lot more about that, I'll just say, critical thing about this whole process is that this GoBORO project is a conversation. We've brought these concepts and these choices to you all as a way of helping to think about the priorities for transit, which alternatives and which values you want the transit network in Greensboro to prioritize and to invest in. And that input will then define what goes into the draft plan. And then we'll come back to you in a second round next year and say, this is what we did based on what you told us. And do we have this right? Do we need to tweak it? And that's a critical part of taking the value choices that you help us answer and reflecting them back in the plan. So Amy, you want to tell us a little more about what's coming up?
Sure. The stakeholder meeting launched on September 26th, and we had a media blitz on September 27th. And at that point, the survey went live, and we started attending some events in downtown Greensboro. We were at the Art in the Arboretum on October 1st. It was a beautiful day. We were there, I think, from 12 to 5 and talked to over 100 people. And I have to say that Greensboro wants to have this conversation. We've been so pleased with the amount of people who have taken the survey, and even you folks this evening joining us and asking such great questions and giving us good input. We're just really encouraged by that. Our next event is going to be on the 18th, which is next Wednesday. We're going to be at Borough Coffee, which is on North Mendenhall Street from 5 to 7:30. If you'd like to join us there. The big Halloween festival at LeBauer Park is Saturday, October 21st, goulash. And I have to throw in, a corny Halloween joke. It's going to be spooktacular. So you're going to want to be there. The 24th, we're back at the bus depot for an open house. And we are working with UNCG and NCA&T on some events for their students and tying into maybe their food banks. That's still to be determined. We're going to be at First Friday event on November 3rd. November 8th, we're going to be at Pyramid Village Walmart for a pop-up, and then going over to LeBauer Park again for the Music in a Bottle. And if any of you are interested in the Hopper Trolley, on November 14th, we will have that parked probably down on South Elm, and you're more than welcome to stop by, board the trolley, check it out if you've never ridden it. We'll have the survey links available, and we'd love to see you all come out. If you can't make it to any of these, we're glad you came to this tonight, and we would just really encourage you to keep having conversations with your community, your coworkers, your neighbors. Encourage everyone to go to the GoBORO website. Gray posted it in the chat, and then it was also in this presentation. The survey link is there, both in English and Spanish. And I think we've had over 1,000 people take the survey, and it's going to be live until November 15th. So we still have a little over a month. And the more input we get from the community, the better Scudder's design team has giving you all what you want. And I do have to just give a shout out to both the city GDOT and GTA folks. They realize that for this to be successful, you all have to have a voice in this project. So that's one thing with the survey, is just hearing from you, and we just want you to stay engaged and stay involved in the project.
Thanks, Amy.
Yeah, there's the contacts.
So we're coming to the close of our conversation this evening. The website, our GoBORO website, is one of the best ways to stay informed on everything that's happening with the project. You can also reach our project team. Reggie Basin, who you heard from at the beginning, transit director, is one of the primary lead at the city, as well as at the Greensboro Department of Transportation, Gray Johnston. They're the primary staff on the city. Karen, who is Amy's colleague, is our engagement lead on the ground from the consultant side, and her contact information is there. And then my contact information is here if you need to reach out to any of us as you're thinking about these questions. But ultimately, we hope you have learned a good bit tonight about the transit choices you have. You can learn a lot more from our website and our reports. And this is the point where we can take a few more questions before we wrap up our meeting for the evening. I think we've got, yes, Nicole's got a question. Are most cities using the spoke and wheel route design? It seems that an entirely new design would help, especially since most good paying jobs are out in less populated areas. Perhaps a web design. So when we're thinking about the overall structure of a bus network, there is a question of what is the thing that's going to be most effective for the most people with a certain amount of resources. And so this is today's network, and it is a hub and spoke style, which is very common in a lot of cities the size of Greensboro. And by hub and spoke, what we mean is most of these routes radiate on corridors that come into and out of downtown and reach into and come to the depot and meet there. And part of the reason that is the primary design today is when you only have every 30-minute service, one of the ways that we can make service reasonably useful for a lot of people is that you can time the connections so that the bus on South Elm, Eugene, the 12, gets to the depot at the same time that the number 3 from North Church is getting there. They sit there for a few minutes, someone can transfer from one to the other, and they can go to the opposite side of the city. So that is to make that possible, all of the bus routes have to come to the same point and meet at the same point and meet there every 30 minutes. So that's one reason why you have a hub and spoke design today. The other reason you have a hub and spoke today is a lot of your city is laid out in a radial fashion centered on downtown, with lots of corridors coming into downtown and coming closer as you get to downtown. And downtown is a pretty dense and active place. And so there's a certain natural convergence of everything wanting to come into downtown. One of the big differences in we don't change that dramatically with the ridership and coverage concepts, in part because if we wanted to have a crosstown route, say on like New Garden, which we've talked a little bit about tonight, we'd have to spend some resources on that. And it is generally going to be more effective, given the density of what's out there on New Garden, to put that service on New Garden in a way that it's connecting through a radial corridor into downtown and serving lots of trips that are going either to downtown or somewhere on the other side, instead of just going around downtown. If we had 4 times the resources or 6 times the resources, then it might make sense to have a frequent route going in a orbital pattern on New Garden all the way around, half of the city. But we don't have that much in the resources. So we have, even at 120%, we're still kind of at the point where the most effective thing to do is to put more frequency on these radial corridors, but to make more of them go through downtown instead of just ending downtown. And when you get more frequency, it makes a lot more sense to do that, so that more crosstown trips can be made without having to transfer. A lot of people would still have to transfer downtown if they wanted to get, if we're looking at the ridership concept, if you were coming from somewhere off of East Market here on the east side of the city and you wanted to get to the big shopping center off of Friendly, you'd still have to transfer downtown, but you'd have a pretty easy transfer because the frequency is so high, it'd be a pretty short wait. But if you were going from somewhere off of East Market out here to the West Wendover shopping area, you could just ride straight through downtown. So that's some of the reasoning for why hub and spoke styles are very common. Even Charlotte still mostly has a hub and spoke with a few orbital routes, but not a lot, and not a lot of very high frequency orbital routes. So, and Nathan asked, what percentage of the cost of the bus system is currently covered just by fares? And I think I'm going to ask Bruce or Gray to pipe up really quick to make sure that we get the exact percentage right. There is a number that we call fare box recovery, which is the percentage of operating costs covered by the fares that are collected. And in a system like Greensboro, a city like Greensboro, usually that number is in the vicinity of 10% or so.
Yeah, I was going to say last time I looked, it was around 10%.
Okay. Yeah. Yep. Are there any other questions we can answer tonight? If you feel like raising a hand, you're welcome to. Or if you have had all your questions answered, which we hope you have. Oh, no, we've got a hand raised from Margaret.
I understand that we don't want to be running empty buses, which we do a lot of now. So cutting the existing route times to 15 minutes would be in the right direction to encourage more people to take buses. But it pretty much locks us into the current design and does nothing to try to provide public service to the areas that have been purposely designed to prevent through traffic going into subdivisions. And I'm thinking of the airport area, which is kind of ironic that you can't get to the airport or to park without driving around in circles. And you can't get to the businesses without a car if you live in that area. And people aren't going to give up their car if they have to wait 30 minutes to get a bus. So I know, is it possible to maybe try to pick a area in the city that has no bus service and try to just concentrate on that area and try to connect it to the existing pattern, rather than trying to cover everybody in the whole city with service, maybe just select certain areas and over time get the people in those areas familiar with public transit and try to make it so that in the future we could be it really a city that doesn't need cars?
So I think there's maybe two answers I can think of to what you're asking. The first answer is, you said, you know, we don't want to have a bunch of empty buses, and I don't want to imply that you want to have a lot of empty buses, but if you want to cover a lot of lower density places that are harder to reach, but there's a sort of compelling need that you feel you really need to go there, that's going to lead you in the more coverage oriented direction. And you are more likely to see some empty buses. And I would tell you that's okay, because if you're making a value choice that you want to prioritize go into those places, then then I'm going to tell you your measure of success for some of your services is going to be just that you're running the service to that area, not necessarily that you're getting a lot of riders out of it. And that's part of the reason this is a value choice about what is it, how do you weigh some of these competing values. To your point about, you know, would you expand some of these things, some of these new service areas more slowly and kind of focus on, you know, encouraging people to use the service in those areas? I think definitely yes. What we're showing you right now are kind of concepts of what you could do over the long term. If you passed a sales tax in a referendum tomorrow and started getting, you know, new revenue coming in the door next week, GTA isn't going to be able to run everything on this map, you know, next year, let alone 2 years from now. It takes time to order buses. It takes time to hire drivers. It takes time to set up new service. So there would be some implementation phasing that we would talk more about in the next portion of our process when we do the draft plan. And part of that implementation is definitely what's the next thing to do next year and then the year after, and you know, the things to do in terms of marketing and encouraging people to use the services and you know, get used to having bus service where they didn't have it before, or a new on-demand service and things like that. So there's definitely a process of that would, how you roll this out over, you know, a 5 to 10 year period that happens. Doesn't happen overnight. Okay. I think we'll make one final call, see if there are any last questions before we wrap up for the evening. Last call. Okay. Well, there's plenty of opportunities to come and visit our team in person over the next couple of weeks. If you have other questions in the meantime, you can connect with us at the GoBORO website. You can reach out to us in the contact info I shared earlier, and we'd be happy to follow up, answer any other questions you have. And again, encourage you to have conversations with your friends, colleagues, neighbors, and others, because this is a really big question about what Greensboro should do, and we want everyone to have their opinion heard and weighed in. So thank you so much. Reggie, would you like to say any final words?
I'd like to just thank everyone to being on the call, and I'm glad you participated in the survey and provided us some good food for thought. And we'll be coming back again to introduce the plan that we were actually selected in about 8 or 9 months from now. So thank you all for being on the call this evening.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great evening.